The HOA built a dog park on my property, so I turned it into a swamp legally. I never thought I'd be the guy with the swamp in his backyard. But life takes unexpected turns. 3 years ago, I bought my dream home in Oak Ridge Estates, a picturesque suburban neighborhood outside of Boston. The property was perfect, 2 acres backing up to a small wooded area, just enough distance from neighbors to feel private, but close enough to be part of a community. Or so I thought. The trouble began last spring when I decided to finally install that koi pond I'd been dreaming about. I hired a surveyor to mark my property lines before breaking ground. When he arrived, clipboard in hand and GPS equipment at the ready, I expected a routine job. What I got instead was a revelation that would change everything. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, pointing to a spot nearly 50 feet closer to my house than I'd always assumed my property ended. "According to county records, your property line actually extends well into what is currently being used as the neighborhood dog park." I stood there, mouth agape. The community dog park, a source of pride for our HOA and constant noise for me, had been partially built on my land. For 3 years, I'd been listening to barking dogs and watching people traipse across what was apparently my own property. "Are you absolutely certain?" I asked. The surveyor nodded gravely. 100%. I've triple-checked the coordinates against the original plot maps. About a third of that dog park is sitting squarely on your property. That evening, as I sat on my back deck watching dog owners chat while their pets romped around on my land, I felt a slow burn of indignation. The HOA had never approached me about using my property. They'd never asked permission, offered compensation, or even acknowledged the encroachment. They'd simply taken what wasn't theirs. I picked up my phone and dialed Linda Harrington, our HOA president, known throughout the neighborhood for her rigid enforcement of even the most trivial HOA regulations. My call went to voicemail. I left a polite but firm message explaining the situation and requesting a meeting. 3 days passed. No response. I tried again, this time sending an email with the survey results attached. Another 3 days. Nothing. Finally, I approached Linda in person at the monthly HOA meeting. "I need to speak with you about the dog park," I said quietly as residents filed in. "Oh." Her smile was practiced, perfunctory. "Is there a maintenance issue?" "It's a bit more serious than that," I replied. "According to a recent survey, part of the park is actually on my property." The smile vanished. "That's impossible. The HOA owns that entire parcel." "The county records disagree," I said, keeping my voice level. "I have documentation." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Submit your concerns in writing to the board. We'll review it at our next meeting." "The next meeting is in a month," I pointed out. "I'd like to resolve this sooner." "Rules are rules, Mr. Reynolds. We have procedures." As I walked home that evening, watching the sun set behind the dog park, my dog park apparently, I realized I was in for a fight. What I didn't know then was how far the HOA would go to ignore my claim, or how creative I would become in response. 2 weeks after the HOA meeting, I received an official response. A single-page letter on HOA letterhead. It stated that the board had reviewed my concern and determined that the dog park boundaries were correct according to their records. They appreciated my interest in community matters, but considered the issue closed. No acknowledgement of my survey. No offer to conduct their own survey. Not even a suggestion to meet and discuss the discrepancy. I consulted a real estate attorney the next day. After reviewing my documents, he confirmed what I already knew. "You're in the right here, Mr. Reynolds," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. "The land is clearly yours according to county records. You have several options. We could send a formal cease and desist letter, file for an injunction to close the portion of the park on your property, or even pursue damages for the unauthorized use of your land. What would you recommend?" I asked. "Well," she smiled slightly, "that depends on what outcome you want. Do you want to reclaim your land, receive compensation, or just make a point?" I thought about it. The dog park itself wasn't useful to me. It was already cleared and fenced, and too far from my house for any practical purpose. But the principle mattered. The HOA's dismissive attitude rankled. I want them to acknowledge they're wrong, I said finally, and I want them to follow their own rules for once. I left her office with a plan. The next day, a certified letter from my attorney arrived at the HOA office, formally notifying them of the property line dispute and requesting a joint survey to resolve the matter. Their response came through their attorney. They refused the joint survey but offered a compromise. They would grant me a special exemption from certain HOA landscaping restrictions as compensation for the alleged encroachment. I nearly laughed out loud. They were offering to let me break their precious rules as compensation for their breaking the law. No deal, I told my attorney. Let's push forward. What followed was a month of legal back and forth. The HOA's strategy became clear: delay, dismiss, and hope I'd give up. They claimed their survey from when the park was built showed different boundaries. When we asked to see it, they said it was in storage. When we demanded they retrieve it, they said the company that did the survey had gone out of business. Meanwhile, life in Oak Ridge Estates grew increasingly uncomfortable. I noticed neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. Anonymous complaints about my yard maintenance began showing up in my mailbox, violations I'd never received before. One evening, I found Linda Harrington standing at the edge of my lawn, taking photos of my house with her phone. "Evening, Linda," I called out, startling her. "Something I can help you with?" "Just documenting violations," she replied stiffly. "Your garden beds exceed the permitted height by 3 inches, and your mailbox post needs repainting." I smiled. "I'll get right on that. While you're here, any update on the property line issue?" She tucked her phone into her pocket. "The board considers the matter closed, Mr. Reynolds." As she walked away, something clicked in my mind. If they wouldn't acknowledge my property rights, perhaps I needed to make the problem impossible to ignore. And there was nothing in the HOA regulations about what I could do with property they claimed wasn't mine. That night, I began researching wetland creation and watershed management. By morning, I had my plan. "You want to do what?" My attorney looked at me as if I'd suggested building a rocket ship. "Create a wetland," I repeated calmly, "on my portion of what's currently being used as the dog park." "A wetland," she echoed. "Like a swamp." "A seasonal wetland habitat," I corrected, sliding a folder across her desk. "I've done my research. The area is actually perfect for it. There's a natural depression that was leveled when they built the park, and the water table is high in that section of the neighborhood. All I need to do is reestablish the natural topography and plant some native wetland species. And this would make the dog park unusable?" I shrugged. "It would return my property to a natural state beneficial to local wildlife. If that happens to make it unsuitable for dogs, that's not really my concern, is it?" She leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You know, Mr. Reynolds, I've been practicing law for 20 years. And this is one of the most creative approaches to a property dispute I've ever encountered." "Is it legal?" I asked. She nodded. "Surprisingly, yes. Since you're not building a structure or creating a nuisance, there's no violation of city codes. And since the HOA insists this isn't your property, they can hardly cite you for HOA violations there. Can they?" 2 days later, I rented a small excavator and began work. I'd taken the precaution of posting property line markers and no trespassing signs along the boundary established by my survey. By mid-morning, I had created a series of shallow depressions and berms, following the natural contours of the land. It didn't take long for word to spread. Linda Harrington arrived, red-faced and flanked by 2 other board members. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, standing just beyond my property markers. I switched off the excavator engine. "Just some landscaping on my property. This is HOA property, and you are in violation of at least 7 different regulations," she sputtered. "Stop immediately or we'll call the police." I smiled pleasantly. "Please do. I'd welcome having an official report documenting your trespass on my clearly marked private property." She glanced at the survey markers, then back at me. "This is outrageous." "I agree," I said. "It's outrageous that the HOA built a dog park on private property without permission and has refused to acknowledge it despite clear documentation. But here we are. They retreated, but I knew this was just the beginning. As I continued working, transforming the neat, flat area into a carefully designed wetland catchment, neighbors gathered at the edges of the dog park, watching in dismay. By the end of the week, I had finished the earthwork and planted the first round of native wetland species: cattails, sedges, and rushes. I installed a small solar-powered pump that would help circulate water until the natural systems established themselves. The property line now featured a stark contrast. On the HOA side, a tidy, wood-chipped dog play area. On my side, a burgeoning wetland already beginning to hold water after a light rain. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Dogs refused to enter the increasingly soggy area. Owners complained about the mosquitoes. The HOA emergency board meeting notices appeared on every door in the neighborhood. I attended, of course. The community room at the clubhouse was packed, buzzing with angry conversations that hushed as I entered. Linda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "We're here to address the vandalism of the community dog park," she began. "Point of order," I said, rising. "You can't vandalize your own property, and according to county records, that's what I've been working on." What followed was 2 hours of heated debate, accusations, and finally, a grudging acknowledgement from the board that there might be a discrepancy in the property records that needed investigation. I left the meeting with a small victory and returned home to water my growing wetland. Nature works quickly when given the chance. Within 3 weeks, my section of the former dog park had transformed dramatically. The depressions now held water permanently, creating a series of small pools connected by marshy areas. The wetland plants had taken root and begun to spread. I'd added floating vegetation, installed nesting boxes, and created rock piles for basking. To my surprise and delight, wildlife had already discovered this new habitat. Frogs had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Dragonflies hovered above the water. I spotted tracks from raccoons and deer coming to drink. One morning, I even saw a great blue heron stalking through the shallows. The dog park, however, was effectively ruined. The remaining area was too small to be useful, and the proximity to the wetland made it unpleasant. Muddy, buggy, and occasionally aromatic as the organic material decomposed. Usage dropped to near zero. Neighborhood sentiment had shifted too. While some residents still glared when they saw me, others had become curious about the transformation. I'd caught people watching the wetland from the path, pointing out wildlife to their children. A local science teacher had even asked if she could bring her class for an ecological field trip. The HOA, meanwhile, had finally commissioned their own property survey. When the results matched mine exactly, they had no choice but to concede. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I received an official letter acknowledging that a portion of the dog park had indeed been built on my property and requesting a meeting to discuss solutions. I agreed to meet. Linda Harrington had been replaced as board president, a detail no one mentioned but everyone knew was connected to the dog park fiasco. The new president, Michael Chun, was more practical and considerably less confrontational. "We'd like to propose a land swap," he said after preliminary pleasantries. The HOA owns a parcel of undeveloped land on the east side of the neighborhood that's approximately the same square footage as your portion of the dog park. We're prepared to exchange ownership and cover all associated legal costs. "And the wetland?" I asked. Michael glanced out the window toward the thriving ecosystem I'd created. "Well, we'd hope to restore the dog park, naturally." I shook my head. "The wetland stays. It's established now with protected species present. Disturbing it would likely violate state wetland protection statutes." This wasn't strictly true. The wetland wasn't yet legally protected, but it could be with the right paperwork, which I'd already begun. After some negotiation, we reached a compromise. I would accept the land swap, officially giving the HOA the wetland property. They would maintain it as a neighborhood nature preserve with educational signage. In exchange, I received a larger parcel than originally offered, a waiver of HOA dues for 5 years, and a formal apology for the property line mistake. The new dog park would be built on the far side of the neighborhood, away from residential properties. As we signed the agreement, Michael hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" You must have known this would cause a huge controversy. Was it worth it? I considered the question carefully. It wasn't about the land itself, I said finally. It was about standing up to a system that selectively enforced rules and ignored facts that were inconvenient. Sometimes you have to create a little disruption to restore balance. He nodded slowly. Well, lesson learned. And for what it's worth, my kids love watching the frogs in the preserve. Today, a year later, the nature preserve is the pride of Oak Ridge Estates, featured in the community newsletter and used regularly by residents. The educational signs explain how wetlands filter water, provide habitat, and prevent flooding, all benefits to the neighborhood. I often walk there in the evenings, watching herons fish and listening to the chorus of frogs. Sometimes I meet neighbors who've become friends through this strange conflict. We laugh about it now, the great dog park controversy that gave us something better instead. My property line is correctly marked these days. My new parcel has become a thriving vegetable garden, and the HOA seems to have learned that some rules, like property laws, matter more than the height of garden beds or the color of mailbox posts. As for me, I've gained an unexpected reputation as both a troublemaker and an environmental advocate. I can live with that contradiction. Sometimes creating a little swamp in your life clears the waters elsewhere.